Imagine walking down a busy street. You pass an old man with tired eyes. He looks ordinary, but what if I told you, he's been walking these streets for over 2,000 years? What if this man witnessed Jesus carrying the cross? What if he made one terrible mistake that cursed him forever? In 1868, a strange man appeared in Salt Lake City. He claimed to be 2,000 years old. He knew ancient languages perfectly. He described biblical events like he was there. Then, he vanished. This wasn't the first time. For centuries, people across Europe reported meeting this mysterious figure. Always the same story. Always the same curse. Today, you're about to discover the most haunting legend in Christian history. You'll learn about the fateful encounter that changed one man's destiny forever. I'll reveal the shocking truth behind multiple historical sightings, and why this 2,000-year-old secret has terrified believers for generations. But here's what most people don't know. This legend hides a dark purpose. It was used to justify centuries of persecution. And the real identity of the wandering Jew might surprise you. By the end of this video, you'll understand why medieval kings trembled at this story. You'll discover the biblical verses that some say prove he's real. And I'll show you evidence that suggests he might still be out there. Stick around because the final revelation will change how you see this ancient mystery forever. Welcome to Destiny Unfolded, where we uncover the secrets history tried to bury. If you're fascinated by biblical mysteries and ancient legends, you're in the right place. Hit that subscribe button now, because we're about to journey back 2,000 years to witness the moment that created Christianity's most terrifying curse. Let's begin. It was a Friday morning in Jerusalem. The year was 33 AD. The streets buzzed with Passover crowds. But something dark was happening. A man named Jesus of Nazareth had been sentenced to death. The Roman soldiers forced him to carry his own cross. It was massive, heavy, splintered wood that cut into his shoulders. Jesus stumbled through the narrow streets. Blood dripped from his wounds. His breathing was labored. Each step was agony. Then it happened. Jesus needed to rest. He was dying, literally dying from the torture he'd endured. He approached a house. Some say it was a shoemaker's shop. Others claim it was near the judgment hall. A man stood in the doorway. Jesus, barely able to stand, leaned against the wall. He just needed a moment. Just a few seconds to catch his breath. But the man in the doorway was angry. Maybe he was worried about his business. Maybe he feared the Roman soldiers. Or maybe, he just didn't care. Move on, the man shouted. You cannot rest here. Some versions say he pushed Jesus away from his door. Others claim he struck him with his hand. The most chilling accounts describe him mocking the dying man. If you are the Son of God, he sneered, why don't you save yourself? Jesus looked up. His eyes met the man's. Blood ran down his face from the crown of thorns. But his voice was clear. What Jesus said next would echo through 2,000 years of history. I go, Jesus replied, his voice steady despite his pain. But you will wait until I return. The man laughed. He thought it was meaningless. The ravings of a dying criminal. How wrong he was. Within hours, Jesus was dead. Crucified on Calvary Hill. But something impossible happened to the man who had rejected him. He couldn't die. Days passed. Then weeks. The man noticed something strange. His wounds healed instantly. His body never aged. He never got sick. At first, he thought it was a blessing. But then, came the hunger that food couldn't satisfy. The thirst that water couldn't quench. The exhaustion that sleep couldn't cure. He tried to end his suffering. Nothing worked. The curse was absolute. Soon, he understood the horrible truth. He was doomed to walk the earth forever. Watching everyone he loved grow old and die. Seeing empires rise and fall. All while carrying the weight of his cruelty. But who was this man? The stories differ dramatically. Some medieval texts call him Cartaphilus, a doorkeeper at Pontius Pilate's judgment hall. Others name him Ahasuerus, a shoemaker from Jerusalem. Another version identifies him as Malchus, the servant of the high priest who cut off a soldier's ear when they arrested Jesus. Each name tells a slightly different story, but they all share one thing: the moment of rejection, the curse, and the endless wandering that followed. The earliest written account appears in 1228. A chronicler in St. Albans, England, recorded a shocking visitor. An archbishop had met a strange man in Armenia. The man spoke perfect Aramaic, the language Jesus spoke. He knew details about the crucifixion that weren't in any gospel. When asked his name, the man replied, "I am he who struck Jesus. I am cursed to wander until he returns." This wasn't just folklore. Church officials documented it. They believed it was real. That 1228 account in England was just the beginning. Word spread like wildfire through medieval Europe. Monks copied the story in their monasteries. Priests whispered about it in cathedral halls. But why did people believe it so easily? Medieval Christians were obsessed with signs and wonders. They lived in constant fear of Judgment Day. And here was proof that biblical prophecy was real. A living witness to Christ's crucifixion. The story gave them chills. It also gave them hope. Church scholars found verses that seemed to support the legend. They pointed to Genesis chapter 4. Cain had murdered his brother Abel. God's punishment. You shall be a restless wanderer on the earth. Sound familiar? Then there was Matthew 16:28. Jesus had said, "There are some standing here who will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom." Medieval theologians asked, what if Jesus meant it literally? What if someone from that crowd was still alive? But the most convincing verse came from John's Gospel. Chapter 18, verses 20 through 22. An officer had struck Jesus during his trial. The same type of violence described in the Wandering Jew legend. By 1400, reports were flooding in from across Europe. A strange man had appeared in Paris. He spoke ancient Hebrew fluently. He described Jerusalem's streets before the Romans destroyed them. In Germany, a similar figure visited monasteries. He knew details about early Christian martyrs. Things that weren't written in any books. Spain reported a mysterious traveler who predicted historical events. He warned about plagues before they happened. About wars before they started. Were these the same person? Or were multiple people claiming to be the cursed wanderer? In the 1600s, something remarkable happened. Cheap printed books called chapbooks flooded European markets. They told wild stories about the wandering Jews' adventures. These weren't religious texts. They were entertainment, popular fiction, but people treated them like documentary evidence. One chapbook claimed he had met Napoleon. Another said he witnessed the fall of Constantinople. A third described his encounter with Christopher Columbus. The line between fact and fiction was disappearing. The printing press changed everything. Before Gutenberg, the legend survived through whispered stories and handwritten manuscripts. It stayed within church circles. But printed books reached everyone. Farmers, merchants, nobility. The story exploded beyond religious boundaries. Publishers discovered something profitable. People would pay good money for wandering Jew stories. The more dramatic, the better. Soon, every major city in Europe had its own version, each more sensational than the last. The legend reached the highest levels of power. Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II reportedly searched for the wandering Jew. He wanted to question him about biblical history. French kings sent investigators to track down sightings. They treated it as a matter of national security. Why? Because if the wandering Jew was real, he possessed dangerous knowledge. He knew secrets about Christ's death, about early Christianity, about prophecies that hadn't been fulfilled yet. But something sinister was happening to the legend. Church leaders began using it for a different purpose. They preached that the wandering Jew represented all Jewish people, that his curse explained why Jews had been scattered across the world. This wasn't accidental. It was calculated propaganda. The legend transformed from a story about individual punishment into justification for persecution. It provided religious cover for centuries of hatred. By the 1700s, the Enlightenment was challenging religious superstition. Scholars began investigating wandering Jew sightings more carefully. They discovered something troubling. Many reports were fabricated. Others were cases of mistaken identity. Some were outright hoaxes designed to make money. But a few cases remained unexplained. Witnesses were credible. Details were verified. Evidence existed. These unexplained encounters kept the legend alive even as skepticism grew. Here's where the legend gets truly bizarre. The wandering Jew didn't have one face, or one name, or even one story. Across different countries, he appeared as completely different people. Yet witnesses swore they met the same cursed soul. In Germany, he was Isaac Lacadam, A cobbler with piercing blue eyes and a grey beard that reached his chest. In France, they called him Le Jew Ferrant. A tall man in tattered robes who spoke with the accent of ancient Jerusalem. In England, he became Joseph Cartaphilus. Clean-shaven, well-dressed, carrying the bearing of nobility. How could one man be so many different people? The most documented sighting happened in Brussels. The year was 1774. Multiple witnesses came forward. Their testimonies were recorded by city officials. A stranger had appeared at the cathedral during Easter Mass. He was elderly but moved with surprising vigor. His clothes were strange, not quite modern, but not entirely ancient either. After the service, he approached Father Benedict, the head priest. In perfect Latin, he said, "I knew your Savior personally." Father Benedict was skeptical, but then the stranger began describing details. The exact layout of Pontius Pilate's palace. The names of Roman guards who weren't mentioned in any gospel. He knew the color of the robes Jesus wore. The type of wood used for the cross. Even the weather on Crucifixion Day. Despite the different appearances, witnesses reported identical characteristics. The eyes were always the same. Ancient. Filled with unbearable sadness. He never ate in public. Never drank wine. When offered food, he would politely decline, saying he wasn't hungry yet. His hands were scarred, not from work or accidents, but from something that looked like nail marks. Most chilling of all, he cast no shadow. Even in bright sunlight, the ground beneath him remained unchanged. Remember that 1868 encounter I mentioned earlier. Here are the full details that will shock you. A man calling himself Juan Espera en Dios appeared in Salt Lake City. The name means John waits for God in Spanish. He claimed to be a cobbler from Jerusalem. Born in the year 0. Present at Christ's crucifixion. Local Mormon leaders were fascinated. They questioned him for hours. He described biblical events with impossible accuracy. He spoke ancient Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek, and Latin fluently. But here's what's truly unsettling. He predicted specific events that later came true. The exact date of a local earthquake. The outcome of political elections. Even personal details about the questioner's futures. Then, as suddenly as he appeared, he vanished. No one saw him leave. His hotel room was empty. As if he had simply dissolved. In 1890, something unprecedented happened. A photographer in Vienna claimed to have captured the wandering Jew on film. The photo showed an elderly man standing outside St. Stephen's Cathedral. But when developed, something was wrong. The man appeared translucent. You could see the cathedral stones through his body. The photographer swore he hadn't manipulated the image. Other photos taken that day were perfectly normal. The photograph disappeared from the Vienna Museum in 1944. During World War II, it was never recovered. Researchers began noticing patterns in the sightings. The wandering Jew appeared most often during times of crisis. Before the Black Death swept Europe. Before religious wars. Before political upheavals. Was he drawn to suffering? Or was he trying to warn people? His message was always the same: repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Every witness reported the same phenomenon. No matter what language they spoke, they understood him perfectly. French speakers heard him in French. Germans heard German. English speakers heard English. But scholars who knew ancient languages caught something else. His grammar and sentence structure matched first-century Aramaic, the language of Jesus' time. It was as if his words were being translated directly into the listener's mind. Artists throughout history tried to capture his appearance. But their paintings never matched the descriptions. In medieval art, he looked like a typical European peasant. Renaissance painters gave him classical Roman features. Modern depictions show a Middle Eastern appearance. Yet witnesses from every era described the same ageless face. Neither young nor old, neither handsome nor ugly, just eternal. The most disturbing reports came from those who engaged him in conversation. He didn't just know the past. He spoke of future events as if they had already happened. In 1347, he warned about a great plague coming from the east. The Black Death arrived 2 years later. In 1453, he appeared in Venice, speaking of Constantinople's fall. It happened within months. In 1914, he was spotted in Sarajevo. He told locals that the world would burn, and nations would fall like dominoes. World War I began weeks later. But what if everything you've heard is missing the real point? What if the Wandering Jew legend was never really about one cursed man? Medieval church leaders knew something modern audiences don't. This wasn't just entertainment. It was a weapon. The legend served a darker purpose. One that would shape centuries of hatred and persecution. To medieval Christians, the Wandering Jew represented the worst possible fate. Worse than death. Worse than hell. He was the living embodiment of what happened when you rejected Christ. Not just spiritual damnation, but physical torment that never ended. Priests used his story to terrify congregations. Look what happens to those who mock our Savior, they would preach. They become cursed outcasts, wandering without rest. The message was clear: submit to the church, or face eternal suffering. Here's where the legend took its most sinister turn. Church authorities began teaching that the Wandering Jew didn't represent just one person. He represented all Jewish people. Medieval Christians believed that Jews, as a group, had rejected Christ. Therefore, as a group, they deserved the same punishment as the legendary wanderer. Displacement, exile, endless suffering. This wasn't theology. It was propaganda designed to justify persecution. Church scholars developed what they called the doctrine of witness. It claimed that God kept Jews alive and scattered across the world for a specific reason. They were living proof of Christianity's truth. Their suffering demonstrated what happened to those who denied Christ. The Wandering Jew became the perfect symbol for this twisted logic. His eternal torment proved Christian superiority. Jewish communities weren't just people practicing a different faith. They were living reminders of divine punishment. But there was another motive. A financial one. Jewish communities often prospered despite persecution. They became successful merchants, bankers, and scholars. Their wealth made them targets. The Wandering Jew legend provided moral cover for robbery. If Jews were cursed by God, then taking their property was almost a religious duty. Kings used this logic to justify expelling entire Jewish populations, while keeping their assets, of course. The legend worked on a deeper psychological level too. It created fear within Jewish communities themselves. Some began to wonder, what if the stories were true? What if their ancestors really had rejected the Messiah? What if their suffering was divine punishment? This self-doubt weakened resistance to persecution. Some converted to Christianity hoping to escape the supposed curse. The legend became a tool of psychological warfare. The Wandering Jew also represented something else that terrified medieval society: the perpetual outsider. Medieval Europe was built on rigid social structures. Everyone had a place. Peasants, nobles, clergy. Everyone belonged somewhere. But the Wandering Jew belonged nowhere. He was stateless, rootless, accountable to no king or lord. In a world obsessed with social order, he represented chaos itself. Yet there's another interpretation scholars rarely discuss. What if the Wandering Jew represented Christian guilt? Early Christians had participated in Christ's crucifixion. Roman soldiers, Jewish authorities, even his own disciples had abandoned him. Perhaps the legend was a way of transferring that collective guilt onto one figure. One scapegoat who could bear the shame for everyone. By making him Jewish, Christians could distance themselves from responsibility. We didn't reject Christ, they could say. The Jews did. The legend also served as a theological insurance policy. It kept alive the promise of Christ's return. As long as the Wandering Jew existed, the Second Coming remained imminent. His presence meant the prophecy would eventually be fulfilled. But centuries passed. Christ didn't return. The Wandering Jew became less a sign of hope and more a reminder of delay. Some theologians began to whisper, what if Christ wasn't coming back? What if the whole promise was false? The legend that once strengthened faith began to undermine it. By the Renaissance, artists began portraying the Wandering Jew differently. Instead of a villain, he became a tragic hero. Painters showed his suffering, his loneliness, his regret. This shift revealed changing attitudes. Society was beginning to question the righteousness of persecution. The Wandering Jew transformed from a symbol of deserved punishment into a figure deserving sympathy. Romantic writers of the 1800s completely reimagined the legend. Poets like Byron and Shelley saw him as a noble figure. He became the ultimate romantic hero. Cursed by love, tormented by memory, seeking redemption through suffering. This wasn't accidental. Romantic writers were rebelling against religious authority. They turned the church's propaganda weapon into a critique of that same church. Today, scholars recognize the Wandering Jew as a projection of human fears and desires. Fear of death, fear of meaninglessness, desire for significance, desire for redemption, but they also see the dangerous power of mythmaking. How stories can be weaponized. How legends can justify hatred. The Wandering Jew reveals both the best and worst of human nature. Our capacity for compassion and our talent for cruelty. The trail goes cold in 1868. That Salt Lake City encounter we discussed earlier. It was the last officially recorded sighting of the Wandering Jew. After that, nothing. Silence. For over 1,800 years, he had appeared regularly across Europe. Suddenly, he vanished completely from the historical record. What happened? Did the curse finally end? Did he find a way to die? Or did he simply learn to hide better? 2 world wars changed everything. Ancient documents were destroyed. Libraries burned. Witnesses died in unprecedented numbers. The Holocaust eliminated entire Jewish communities that had preserved oral traditions about the Wandering Jew. Stories that had survived for centuries were lost forever. But something else disappeared too. Physical evidence. Remember that mysterious photograph from Vienna? Gone, along with countless other artifacts that might have provided proof. Was this coincidence? Or was someone systematically erasing the evidence? Yet the sightings didn't completely stop. They just became different. In 1945, survivors from concentration camps reported meeting a strange man. He appeared in different camps, always at the worst moments. He never spoke, just stood silently among the prisoners. His presence somehow gave them strength to survive another day. When questioned later, survivors gave identical descriptions. Ancient eyes, scarred hands, a face that seemed to carry the weight of centuries. The digital age brought new possibilities. And new problems. Online forums buzz with modern Wandering Jew encounters. Homeless shelters report mysterious visitors who help during disasters then disappear. Hospital workers describe an elderly man who visits dying patients. He holds their hands, whispers in languages they don't recognize. Patients who were suffering suddenly find peace. Security cameras never capture him clearly. The footage is always blurry, as if technology itself rejects his image. In New York City, subway workers tell stories. During 9/11, a strange man appeared underground. He guided people to safety through tunnels they didn't know existed. He spoke to each person in their native language. Korean, Spanish, Arabic, perfectly fluent in every one. When the rescue teams arrived, he was gone. No one knew his name. No one could describe his face clearly. But they all remembered his eyes. Ancient, filled with infinite sadness. In 2003, a team of researchers began investigating modern Wandering Jew reports. They used scientific methods, DNA analysis, facial recognition software, statistical modeling. Their findings were disturbing. The sightings followed patterns. They clustered around natural disasters, terrorist attacks, and humanitarian crises. The descriptions, despite coming from different continents and cultures, matched with impossible precision. Most unsettling, witnesses who had never heard the legend gave details that matched medieval accounts perfectly. Some modern encounters included predictions about future events. A man matching the Wandering Jews. Description appeared in various cities before major disasters. He was spotted in New Orleans weeks before Hurricane Katrina. In Japan before the 2011 tsunami. In New York before the stock market crashes. Always the same message: prepare. The time of testing approaches. But here's what modern investigators discovered. The sightings weren't consistent enough to represent one person. Different heights, different ages, different ethnicities. This led to a shocking new theory. What if the Wandering Jew isn't one cursed individual? What if it's a role? A burden passed from one person to another across the centuries? Or stranger still, what if multiple people received similar curses? What if the legend represents not one wanderer, but many? While the man himself may have vanished, his influence exploded in modern culture. Comic books turned him into a superhero. Movies made him a romantic antihero. Video games featured him as a playable character. Each adaptation kept the core elements alive. Immortality, suffering, The search for redemption. The legend survived by evolving. By becoming entertainment rather than religious doctrine. Modern scholars are divided. Some dismiss the entire legend as medieval superstition. Others find too many unexplained elements to ignore completely. Dr. Sarah Mitchell at Oxford University spent 20 years studying Wandering Jew accounts. Her conclusion: something happened. Whether supernatural or not, witnesses encountered phenomena they couldn't explain. But Professor Hans Weber from Berlin disagrees. Mass hysteria combined with anti-Semitic propaganda. Nothing more. The debate continues. Without new evidence, it may never be resolved. Yet here's the strangest part. In our modern, scientific age, the Wandering Jew remains relevant. He represents our deepest fears. Loneliness, meaninglessness, the terror of living forever without purpose. He also represents our deepest hopes. That suffering has meaning, that redemption is possible, that someone witnesses our pain. Today, people make pilgrimages to places associated with the legend. Not for religious reasons, but for connection to mystery. They visit the sites of famous sightings. They share stories online. They create art inspired by his journey. The internet has become his new path. Digital wandering replacing physical wandering. So where is he now? Still walking among us, invisible in plain sight. Finally at rest after 2,000 years of suffering. Or was he never real at all, just humanity's way of processing guilt, fear, and the desperate hope for meaning? The mystery endures because we need it to endure. In a world that demands scientific proof for everything, some part of us still craves the unexplained. So what is the truth about the Wandering Jew? After diving deep into 2,000 years of history, we've uncovered something remarkable. The legend isn't found anywhere in the Bible. No gospel mentions a cursed wanderer. No apostle writes about meeting him. This story is entirely human creation, born from medieval minds trying to make sense of suffering and faith. But here's the shocking secret I promised you at the beginning. The Wandering Jew was never meant to be one person's story. He was designed to be everyone's story. Think about it. We all wander through life searching for meaning. We all carry guilt from our mistakes. We all fear being forgotten after we die. The Wandering Jew became immortal not because of a divine curse, but because he represents the human condition itself. This explains why the story has survived for centuries. Why it appears in every culture. Why it adapts to every age. It's not about one man's punishment. It's about our collective journey. Medieval Christians saw him as divine justice. Romantic poets saw him as tragic nobility. Modern audiences see him as existential struggle. Each generation finds exactly what it needs in his story. But we cannot forget the legend's darkest chapter. How it was weaponized against Jewish communities. How it justified centuries of persecution. The Wandering Jew teaches us something crucial about the power of stories. They can inspire hope or spread hatred. They can unite people or tear them apart. The same legend that comforted some became a tool of oppression for others. Does this mean he never existed? That every sighting was fraud or delusion? Maybe. But consider this. In a world of 8 billion people, is it impossible that someone, somewhere, carries themselves as if they've witnessed history's greatest tragedy? Maybe the Wandering Jew isn't supernatural. Maybe he's just deeply human. The real power of this legend isn't in proving whether one cursed man walks the earth. It's in recognizing that we're all wandering in some way. We all search for redemption. We all carry regrets. We all hope our suffering has meaning. The Wandering Jew shows us that these struggles are universal. They connect us across centuries and cultures. Whether the Wandering Jew is real or myth doesn't matter as much as what he represents. The endless human search for purpose. The hope that our stories matter. In a way, we're all Wandering Jews. Traveling through life, carrying our burdens, seeking our own form of salvation. His journey is our journey. His search is our search. And maybe that's the greatest truth of all. If this deep dive into one of history's most mysterious legends fascinated you, show your support by hitting that like button. It helps more people discover these hidden stories. And if you want to explore more biblical mysteries and ancient secrets that mainstream history ignores, subscribe to Destiny Unfolded right now. We're just getting started uncovering the truth behind the world's greatest legends. What other mysteries would you like us to investigate next? Drop your suggestions in the comments below. Until next time, keep questioning, keep searching, keep wandering toward the truth.